Part 6, Chapter 2. I mean, look at these cigarettes, Porfiry Petrovich said at last, having lit one, his breath recovered. They do me harm, nothing but harm, yet I can't give them up. I cough, sir. I've begun to get a tickling in my throat, and I'm short of breath. I'm a coward, you know. I went to see B for a consultation the other day. He spends half an hour at an absolute minimum examining each patient. He actually burst out laughing just at the sight of me, tapped my chest, and osculated me. By the way, he said you ought to avoid tobacco. Your lungs are dilated. But I mean, how can I give it up? What am I going to use as a substitute? I don't drink, sir, and that's what's really wrong with me. He. My not drinking's the real trouble I suffer from. All is relative, Rodion Romanovich. All is relative. What's he up to now? Raskolnikov thought with distaste. Is he starting his old routine again? The whole of the recent scene that had taken place at their last meeting suddenly came back to him, and the feeling he had then surged towards his heart in a wave. You know, I came to see you a couple of evenings ago. Perhaps you weren't aware of it, Porfiry Petrovich went on, studying the room. I came into this very room. I happened to be passing just as I was today. Why don't I pay him a little visit, I thought. I came up here and the door to your room was wide open. I took a look round, waited for a bit, didn't bother reporting my presence to your serving maid, and left. Don't you have a lock on your door? Raskolnikov's face was growing darker and darker. It was as if Porfiry had guessed what he was thinking. I've come to explain myself to you, dear Rodion Romanovich, to explain myself to you, sir. I owe you an explanation, and am indeed obliged to offer you one. He continued with a little smile, even patting Raskolnikov on the knee with the palm of his hand. At almost the same instant, however, his face suddenly assumed a serious and troubled expression. To Raskolnikov's surprise, it even seemed to twitch with sadness. He had never so far seen such an expression on Porfiry's face and had not suspected him to be capable of it. That was a strange scene that occurred between us last time, Rodion Romanich. I suppose a strange scene also occurred between us at our first meeting, but at the time, well, but that's now just one thing among others. What I want to say to you, sir, is this. It may very well be that I am very guilty in your regard. I feel that to be the case, sir. I mean, just remember the way we parted. Your nerves were screaming and your knees were trembling, and so were mine. And you know, the way the situation between us developed, it really wasn't decent, certainly not the way two gentlemen ought to behave. For we are, after all, gentlemen, are we not? That is to say, in all situations, we are first and foremost gentlemen. That needs to be borne in mind, sir. I mean, remember the point it came to. Simply quite indecent, sir. What game is he playing? What does he take me for? Raskolnikov wondered in amazement, raising his head and staring at Porfiry for all he was worth. After some thought, I have reached the conclusion that it is better for us to be candid with each other, Porfiry Petrovich went on, throwing his head back slightly and lowering his eyes, as though not wishing to embarrass his former victim any more, as though he were looking askance at his earlier tricks and ploys. No, sir, suspicions and scenes of that kind cannot continue for long. Mokoka put us out of our misery that time. Otherwise, I really don't know what might have transpired between us. That wretched little weasel of an artisan was sitting behind the partition of my chambers. Can you imagine it? Of course, you know that already. And I, for my part, know that he went to see you later on. But the things you supposed at that time weren't true. I hadn't sent for anyone, and I hadn't yet given any kind of instructions. I expect you're wondering why. What can I say? You see, the whole thing had fairly flabbergasted me, too. I only just managed to have the yard keeper sent for. I expect you noticed them on your way out. A certain thought passed through my mind at the time, swiftly, with the speed of lightning. You see, Rodion Romanich, I was rather sure of what I thought I knew. Although, all right, I thought even if I let this one go, I'll catch the next one by the tail, and I shan't let go of that, at least, because it'll be mine, all mine. You know, Rodion Romanich, sir, you have a very irritable nature. I would even venture to say that it's excessively so when viewed against the other basic features of your character and heart, which I flatter myself in the hope of having partially understood. Well, but of course, even then I should have realized that it doesn't always happen that a man will get up and blurt out his most cherished secrets to you. Even though it does happen, especially if one drives a man beyond the limit of his endurance, it is, I must admit, a rare occurrence that I should have realized. No, I thought, just give me one little detail, just the smallest detail, just one, as long as it's something I can take in my hands, as long as it's something concrete and not this psychology stuff. Because I thought if a man is guilty, then one should at least expect to get something tangible out of him. And it's even permissible to look for the most unexpected result. At the time, I was relying on your character, Rodion Romanich, on your character more than anything else, sir. I really had the highest hopes of you. But you, why are you talking like this now? Raskolnikov muttered at last, without even giving the question any proper thought. What's he talking about? He mused to himself. Does he really think I'm innocent? Why am I talking like this? Why? I've come to explain myself to you, sir, considering it, as it were, my sacred duty to you, my sacred duty to do so. I want to put it all before you with perfect completeness, exactly as it happened, the whole episode of that brainstorm of mine. I made you put up with an awful lot, Rodion Romanich. I'm not a monster, sir. I mean, I understand how hard it must be for a man to carry all this on his shoulders when he's depressed, but also proud, masterful, and impatient. Above all, impatient. I, at any rate, consider you as a man of the most noble character, sir, with even the beginnings of true greatness of soul, though I don't agree with you in all your convictions. Something I view it as my duty to declare to you in advance, openly and with complete sincerity, for above all, I do not wish to deceive. When I made your acquaintance, I felt an attachment to you. Perhaps my way of putting it makes you want to laugh. You have a right to, sir. I know that you didn't like me from the very first sight of me, and there's really no reason at all why you should. Consider me how you will, but what I want to do now is employ every means at my disposal to wipe out the impression I made, and prove to you that I, too, am a man with a heart and a conscience. I speak sincerely, sir. Porfiry Petrovitch observed a dignified silence. Raskolnikov felt an onrush of some new fear. The thought that Porfiry believed him to be innocent had suddenly begun to frighten him. I don't really think it's necessary for me to tell it all in sequence, the way it suddenly began, Porfiry Petrovitch went on. Indeed, I think that would be superfluous, and in any case, I doubt whether I'd be able to, sir, because how is it to be properly explained? First of all, there were rumors going about. Now, as to what kind of rumors they were, from whom I heard them, and when, and in what connection they came to concern yourself, all that is also, I believe, superfluous. For me personally, it began by chance, an event of pure chance of which one could say in the highest degree that it might or might not have happened. What was it? I don't think we need to go into that either. All those things, those rumors and chance events formed themselves into a single thought inside my head. I will confess to you openly, because if one is to confess, then it must be to everything. I was the first to pounce on you at the time. All that business about the markings the old woman made on her pledges and so on and so forth, all that was a lot of rubbish, sir. One can count hundreds of such instances. I also had occasion to learn about the scene at the local police bureau. Also by chance, sir, not simply in passing, but from the lips of a remarkable and capital storyteller who, without really being aware of it, gave a masterly account of the whole thing. It was all just one thing among so many others, Rodion Romanich, my dear chap. I mean, how could I have failed to start looking in a certain direction? 100 rabbits will never make a horse, and 100 suspicions will never make a case, as a certain English proverb says. I mean, that's only common wisdom, sir. But you see, one also has to deal with the passions, sir, for an investigator is only human. At that point, too, I recalled your article, the one in that old journal. You remember you talked about it in some detail during your first visit? I poured a bit of scorn on it at the time, but that was in order to stir you up for later on. I shall say it again. You're a very impatient and oversensitive fellow, Rodion Romanich. That you're bold, pushing, serious, and have felt a great deal, all that I've known for a long time, sir. I am familiar with all those sensations of yours, and I read your article as though it had been written by someone I knew. It had been thought up in a state of frenzy, during sleepless nights, with much surging and beating of the heart, with frustrated enthusiasm. Oh, that proud, frustrated enthusiasm is a dangerous thing in youth. At the time, I poured scorn on it, but now I will tell you that I'm really terribly fond in an amateur capacity of those first youthful impassioned essays of the pen. Smoke, mist, a string vibrating in the mist. Your article is absurd and fantastic, but it contains a gleam of sincerity, a youthful, uncorrupted pride, the boldness of despair. It's a gloomy piece of work, sir, but that's the good thing about it. I read your article through and then put it aside, and as I was doing so, I thought, well, that chap's going to have some problems. So I ask you, after an introduction like that, how could I fail to be engrossed by the sequel? Oh, good heavens, was I going to say anything? Was I going to put my finger on anything in particular? All I did at the time was observe. What's going on here, I thought, but nothing was going on, absolutely nothing, and even perhaps the highest degree of nothing. And in any case, for me, an investigator, to get so engrossed like that was actually quite improper. I had Mokoka on my hands, and there was evidence, too. Whatever you say, it was evidence. And he, too, dragged in a psychological angle of his own. It was necessary to spend some time on him, because, after all, this was a matter of life and death. What am I telling you? Why am I telling you all this? So that you know, and so that, possessing the mind and the heart that you do, you won't blame me for my aggressive behavior that time. It wasn't really aggressive, sir. I tell you that in all sincerity. He. What do you suppose? I didn't search your room that time? Oh, but I did, sir. I did. He. I did while you were lying here in bed, unofficially and incognito. But I did conduct a search. Your room was examined right down to the last stray hair. When the clues we had were fresh, but sensed. It's a different language, I guess. Sensed. I thought this fellow's going to show up. He's going to show his face, and pretty quick, too. If he's guilty, he'll show his face. Another man might not, but this one will. And do you remember the way Mr. Razumikin began spilling the beans to you? We arranged that in order to get you worried, and so we let that rumor out on purpose. And he'd spill the beans to you, and Mr. Razumikin is not the kind of man who restrains his indignation. Mr. Zamyatov was the one who first noticed your anger and your disguised boldness. I mean, what kind of behavior was that to go blurting out in an inn? I killed her. Such boldness, such daring, sir. If he is guilty, he's a real fighter, I thought. So then I had a bit of a think, sir. I would wait for you with all my might. But meanwhile, you'd quite simply wipe the floor with Zamyatov. And, well, actually, the trouble with all that accursed psychology stuff is that it cuts two ways. Well, so I waited for you. I looked, and God gave you to me. You showed your face. My heart was fairly thumping, I can tell you. I mean, why did you come to see me that morning? The way you laughed as you came in that time. Do you remember? I mean, I saw through it all as though through a pane of glass. And if I hadn't been waiting for you in such a peculiar fashion, I never have even noticed anything in your laughter. That's what it means to be in the right mood. And Mr. Razumikin that day, oh, the stone, do you remember? The one under which certain objects were hidden? Well, it was just as if I could see it in a kitchen garden somewhere. That's what you told Zamyatov. And he said the same thing when you came to see me the second time. And the way you began to go over your article that time, the way you started to expound the ideas in it so that one construed your each and every word in a double sense, as though there were another sitting under it. Another meaning. Well, you see, Rodion Romanich, it was in that manner that I reached the pillars of Hercules, and as soon as I knocked my forehead against them, I came to. No, I said to myself, what am I doing? I mean, all this can quite easily be explained in a different way. That will make it seem even more natural. Torment, sir? No, I thought I'd better... torment, sir? No, I thought I'd do better getting hold of a little detail. And when I heard you talking about those doorbells, I fairly froze. I even got the shakes. Well, I thought, there it is, my little detail, the very one. I wasn't even thinking anymore. I simply couldn't bring myself to. I'd have given 1,000 rubles of my own money at that moment just to have seen you with my own eyes, seen you walking that 100 yards side by side with that wretched little artisan after he called you a murderer to your face and not daring to ask him a single question the whole way. Well, and the chill in your spinal cord, those doorbells when you were ill and half delirious after that, is it any wonder, Rodion Romanich, that I played such jokes on you? And why did you show your face just at that very moment? I mean, it was just as if someone had pushed you in. I swear to God it was. And if Mokoka hadn't pulled us apart, then... But do you remember Mokoka? Have you gotten well in your memory? I mean, that was a thunder, sir. It was thunder booming from a thundercloud, an arrow from the gods. Well, and how did I greet it? I didn't believe it, not one little word of it. You yourself saw how I was. But that's not all. Later, after you gone, when he began to give the most coherent replies to certain points I raised so that I was struck with wonder, even then I didn't believe one brass kopek's worth of it. That's what they mean when they say a man's made himself as hard as a diamond. No, I thought, never. What's Mokoka got to do with it? Razumikin told me just now that you're still pressing the charge against Razumikin told me now that you're still pressing the charge against Nikolai, and that you assured him of the fact. He ran out of breath, nearly choking, and did not finish his sentence. He listened in a state of agitation that was beyond all words as the man who had seen right through him disavowed his own perceptions. He ran out of breath, nearly choking, and did not finish his sentence. He listened in a state of agitation that was beyond all words as the man who had seen right through him disavowed his own perceptions. In his ambiguous words, he was greedily searching and feeling for something more final and precise. Mr. Razumikin, Porfiry Petrovich exclaimed, as though he were relieved at having been put a question by the hitherto silent Raskolnikov. He, oh, Mr. Razumikin simply had to be got out of the way. Two's company, three's a crowd. Mr. Razumikin's not your man, sir. He's just an innocent bystander. Why? He came running to me with such a pale face. Well, never mind about him. Why get him mixed up in this? Now, as regards Mokoka, would you like to know what sort of a character he is? According to my understanding, that is, the first thing to be said is that he's still an ungrown child, and not so much a coward as a sort of artist. It's true, sir. Don't laugh at my explaining him that way. He's harmless and susceptible to every influence. He has a heart. He has imagination. He likes to dance and sing. They say he tells stories in such a way that people come flocking from other parts to listen to him. He attends the school. He'll laugh to the point of collapse if you so much as show him a finger. And he drinks himself senseless, not so much from debauchery as from sheer occasion, now and then, the way a child might when people ply him with vodka. Then there's the way he went stealing that time, yet he wasn't really aware he'd done anything wrong, because if I'd picked them up off the pavement, what kind of stealing was that? And did you know that he's a rascalnik, or rather, not so much a rascalnik as simply a sectarian? That there were runners in his family, and it's not so long ago since he himself spent 2 whole years in the country under the spiritual guidance of some elder or other. All this I learned from Makolka and his Zaraisk chums, and that's not half of it. He actually intended to run away to a hermitage. He got the holy fever, used to stay up all night praying, reading the old true books, and lost all sense of reality. St. Petersburg had a powerful effect on him, especially the fair sex, and of course, the vodka. He's a susceptible fellow, sir. He forgot his elder and everything else as well. I have information that a certain artist here in town took a liking to him, began paying him visits, but then this indecent blew up. Well, he was scared, could only think of hanging himself or running away. What are we going to do about the image of our legal system that's developed among the common people? I mean, some of them are absolutely terrified by the word trial. Who's to blame for it? Well, perhaps these new courts will have some effect. My God, I do hope so. Well, sir, while he's been in Gaol, G-A-O-L, he's evidently remembered his honorable elder again. The Bible's come out again, too. Have you any conception, Rodion Romanovich, of what the word suffering means to some of them? They don't do it for the sake of anyone in particular, but just for its own sake, purely and simply as suffering. All that matters is to accept suffering, and if it's from the powers that be, that's all to the good. I once had a case of an incredibly docile prisoner who spent a whole year in Gaol, G-A-O-L. He used to read his Bible on top of the stove at nights, and he read to the point where he suddenly, for no apparent reason, snatched up a brick and threw it at the head gaoler, who'd done nothing to arouse the man's anger. And the way he threw it, he purposely aimed it an arching too wide so as not to cause the man any injury. Well, we all know what happens to a prisoner who attacks an officer with an offensive weapon, and he accepted his suffering. So you see, I now suspect that Makolka wants to accept his suffering, or something of that sort. I know that to be true, sir. I even have evidence. It's just that he doesn't know that I know. Don't you think it's amazing that a bunch of peasants like that can throw up people with such imagination? One finds them everywhere. The elders begun to have an influence on him again, particularly after the episode with the noose that jogged his memory. But in any case, he'll tell me everything himself. He'll show his face. Do you suppose he'll be able to keep it up? Just you wait. He'll deny it all. I'm waiting for him to show up at any moment now and go back on his testimony. I've taken a liking to this Makolka, and I'm investigating him thoroughly. And what do you think? To some of the points I put to him, he gave me really coherent answers. He's obviously got hold of the necessary information and cleverly prepared himself. Wow, but with some of the other points, he got himself into a fair old mess. Didn't know a single thing. Hadn't the foggiest, and didn't even suspect as much. No, Rodion Romanich, old chap, Makolka's not our man. This is a murky, fantastic case, a contemporary one, an incident that belongs to our own age, an age in which the heart of man has grown dark and muddied, in which one hears the saying quoted that blood reinvigorates, in which material comfort is preached as life's only aim. It's a case that involves dreams derived from books, sir, a heart that has been overstimulated by theories. In it, we see a determination to take the first step, but it's a determination of a peculiar kind. The man's taken his resolve, but it's as if he'd fallen off a cliff or jumped from a steeple, as if he'd blundered into the crime like some clockwork automaton. He forgot to close the door behind him, and he killed 2 people because of a theory. He didn't even bother to take the money that was there, and the things he did take, he hid under a stone. It wasn't enough for him to go through torment as he stood behind the door as people were hammering at the door and ringing the bell. No, after that, he had to go back to the empty apartment in a state of semi-delirium in order to remind himself of that bell. He needed to feel the chill down his spine once again. Well, that was probably caused by his illness. But what about this? He committed a murder, yet he considers himself an honorable fellow. He has contempt for other people, goes around like some pallid angel. No, Makolka's not our man, my dear Rodion Romanovich. Makolka's not our man. These words, following as they did on all that had gone before and had seemed like a disavowal, were wholly unexpected. Raskolnikov shuddered as though he had been run through by a blade. Then, who is the murderer? He asked, unable to restrain himself in a gasping voice. Porfiry Petrovitch fairly reeled back in his chair as though this question was so unexpected that he was amazed by it. Who is the murderer? He said, as though unable to believe his ears. Why, you are the murderer. You are the murderer, Rodion Romanovich. You are, sir, he added almost in a whisper, in a voice of total conviction. Raskolnikov leaped from the sofa. stood there for a few seconds and sat down again. Without saying a word, faint convulsions suddenly passed across his whole face. That lip of yours is quivering again, the way it did that time, Porfiry Petrovich muttered, almost with sympathy. I don't think you've quite understood me, Rodion Romanich, he added after a slight pause, and that's why you're so dumbfounded. I came here with the specific purpose of saying everything and bringing the matter out into the open. It wasn't me. I didn't do it, Raskolnikov whispered, the way little children do when they are caught red-handed. Yes, Rodion Romanich, sir, it was you and no one else, sir, Porfiry whispered sternly with conviction. They both fell silent, and their silence lasted a strangely long time, some 10 minutes. Raskolnikov leaned his elbows on the table and ran his fingers through his hair, not saying anything. Porfiry Petrovich sat quietly waiting. Suddenly, Raskolnikov gave Porfiry a contemptuous look. Up to your old capers again, Porfiry Petrovich, still pursuing those methods of yours. I really wonder you're not sick of them by now. Ha, that will do. What methods do I need now? It would be different if there were witnesses here. As it is, we're whispering in private. You can see for yourself that I haven't come here in order to hunt you down and trap you like a hare. Whether you confess or not is a matter of indifference to me right at this moment. In my own mind, I'm convinced, and I don't need you to help me. If that's so, why'd you come here? Raskolnikov asked irritably. I'll put the questions again. If you think I'm guilty, why don't you put me in prison? Well, now, there's a question. I'll answer it in stages in the first place. It wouldn't do me any good to place you directly under arrest. What do you mean, it wouldn't do you any good? If you're convinced, then you must. Oh, what does it matter that I'm convinced? I mean, all this is still just a dream of mine, sir. Why should I put you into retirement like that? You yourself must know that's what it would be. You yourself must know that's what it would be tantamount to, since you're asking me to do it. Say, for example, I were to bring you face to face with that wretched little artisan, and you said to him, "Are you drunk or something? Who saw you with me?" I simply thought you were a drunk, and you were drunk in any case. Well, what would I be able to say to that, particularly since your version of events is more probable than his, because his testimony consists of nothing but psychology, which is almost an insult to his ugly mug. And you've hit the nail on the head, because the villain drinks like a fish and everyone knows it. And then there's the fact that I myself have already several times openly confessed to you that this psychology stuff is a two-edged weapon, that its other wedge is always going to be larger and more plausible, and that apart from it, I haven't so far got anything on you. And even though I'm going to put you aside, and even though I'm going to put you inside in any case and have actually come here, though it's not official etiquette, in order to caution you about it in advance, I will tell you straight out, though again it's not official etiquette, that it won't do me any good. Well, sir, and in the second place, I've come to see you. Yes, and in the second place, Raskolnikov was still gasping. Because, as I told you just now, I consider it my duty to offer you an explanation. I don't want you to see me as a monster, particularly as I'm sincerely fond of you, believe it or not. In consequence of which, in the third place, I've come to you with an open and straightforward proposition that you should file a plea of guilty. That would be countless times better for you, and better for me too, because then it would be over and done with. Well, what do you say? Am I making sense to you? Raskolnikov thought for a moment. What I say is this, Porfiry Petrovich. I mean, you've been telling me yourself that it's all just psychology. Yet here you are wandering over into mathematics. What if you're simply mistaken? No, Rodion Romanich, I'm not mistaken. I am in possession of a certain little detail. You see, it was something I found at the time, sir. The Lord sent it to me. What little detail? I'm not going to tell you, Rodion Romanich, and in any case, I don't have the right to delay any longer. I'm going to put you inside, sir. So reflect on it right now. It's all the same to me. And consequently, I'm only thinking of you. I swear to God, it will be better for you, Rodion Romanich. Raskolnikov smiled an ironic, malevolent smile. Why, this is not only ridiculous, it's downright shameless. I mean, even if I were guilty, which I don't for one moment admit, why should I file a plea of guilty with you? Even you yourself say that when you put me aside, it'll be as if I'd been put into retirement. Ah, Rodion Romanich, don't place too much credence in words. It may be no sort of retirement at all. I mean, that's only a theory, and my own to boot. And what kind of an authority am I to you? It's quite possible that I'm concealing something from you even now, sir. I'm not just going to produce everything and suddenly lay it all before you. He. And there's another thing. How can you ask why you should file a plea guilty? Have you any idea what a reduction in your sentence that would mean? I mean, when would you be doing it? At what kind of a moment? Just think about that. When another man's already accepted responsibility for the crime and got the whole case in a mess, and I swear to God himself that And I swear to God himself that I'll fabricate a thing or two and arrange it with the authorities so that your plea will come as something totally unexpected. We'll completely demolish all that psychology. I'll convert all those suspicions about you into thin air so that your crime will look like some kind of a brainstorm. Because in all conscience, a brainstorm is what it was. I'm a decent man, Rodion Romanich, and I'll keep my word. Raskolnikov fell sadly silent and let his head droop. He thought for a long time and at length smiled his ironic smile once more. This time, however, it was meek and mournful. No, I don't want it, he said, as though he had completely given up trying to hide anything from Porfiry. It isn't worth it. I really don't want your reduction. Ah, that was what I was afraid of, Porfiry Petrovich exclaimed heatedly and almost in spite of himself. That was what I was afraid of, that you wouldn't want our reduction. Raskolnikov looked at him sadly and reprovingly. I say, don't turn your nose up at life, Porfiry went on. You've still a great deal ahead of you. What do you mean you don't want a reduction? What do you mean, you impatient man? A lot of what ahead of me? Life, what are you, a prophet? What do you know? Seek and ye shall find. Perhaps God's been waiting for you in all this, and you won't wear them forever, the fetters. No, I'll get a reduction, Raskolnikov laughed. What is it that you're scared of? The bourgeois shame? It may be that you're scared of it without realizing it because you're young, yet you know you shouldn't feel any fear or shame at filing a plea of guilty. Ha ha, I don't give a spit for all that, Raskolnikov whispered contemptuously and with revulsion. As though he did not even want to speak, he started to get up as though he were about to go off somewhere, but then sat down again in visible despair. So that's what it is it? You've lost your confidence and think I'm indulging in gross flattery towards you, but have you really lived all that much? Are there really all the many things that you understand? You concocted a theory and were then ashamed that it didn't hold water, that it turned out to be most unoriginal. And indeed, it turned out vile. There's no denying that. But even so, you're not a hopeless villain. Not such a villain at all. At any rate, you haven't fooled yourself for long. You've reached the pillars of Hercules in one go. I mean, what sort of man do you suppose I think you are? I think you're one of the kind who, even if his intestines were being cut out, would stand looking at his torturers with a smile as long as he'd found a God or a faith. Well, find those and you'll live. You ought to have had a change of air long ago. One can see that a mile off. For heaven's sake, suffering is not such a very terrible thing. Go and suffer for a bit. That Mococa fellow may well be right in wanting to suffer. I know you didn't believe it, but don't try to be too clever either. Surrender yourself directly to life without circumspection. Don't worry. It will carry you straight to the shore and put you on your feet. What shore? How should I know? I simply believe that you still have a lot of living to do yet. I know that you're listening to my words just now as if they were some sermon learnt by rote. Perhaps later on you'll remember them. Perhaps they'll be useful to you someday. That's why I'm saying them. It's also a good thing that it was only an old woman you murdered. If you thought up another theory, you might have committed some deed 100 million times more horrible. And maybe that you still ought to thank God. Why, for all you know, he may be preserving you for something. Be of great heart and fear less. Are you afraid of the great discharge of duty that lies ahead of you? No, at the point you have reached, such fear is shameful. Since you have taken such a step, you must stand firm. You have reached the moment of justice. So discharge the duty that justice requires of you. I know you don't believe it, but I promise you, life will carry you through. You'll even get to like each other. Afterwards. What you need now, though, is simply air, air, air. Raskolnikov gave a terrible shudder. Who are you anyway? He exclaimed. What sort of a prophet are you? What's this majestic tranquility from whose heights you're uttering these wise prophecies to me? Who am I? Oh, I'm just a man who's had his day. A man who may have feelings and be capable of sympathy, who may even know a few things, but one who has quite definitely had his day. But you're a different kettle of fish. God has a life in store for you, though who knows, perhaps yours too will pass away like smoke and come to nothing. So what if you will end up with another class of person? You're not going to miss your creature comforts, are you? Not with a heart and feelings like yours. What does it matter that no one may see you for an awfully long time? Time's not what matters. It's you that does. Become a son, and then everyone will see you. A son must first and foremost be a son. What are you smiling again? Why are you smiling again? Because I'm such a shiller? And I bet you're thinking that I'm trying to ingratiate myself with you now. So what if I am? Tee-hee-hee. You know, Rodion Romanich, sir, I don't think you ought to believe anything I say. I don't think you ought to believe everything I say. This is just the way I'm used to carrying on. I'll admit that. Though I'd add just one thing. As to the question of to what extent I'm a villain and to what extent I'm a decent man, you may judge for yourself. When are you planning to arrest me? Or I may allow you to wander around for another day and a half or possibly two. Think about it, my dear chap, and say your prayers. It will be better for you. I swear to God it will. I promise you. And what if I run away? Raskolnikov asked with a strange, ironic smile. No, you won't run away. A music might run away. A fashionable sectarian might run away. The lackey of other men's thoughts. Because you've only to show him the tip of your finger, like Warrant Officer Dirka, and he'll believe anything you tell him for the rest of his life. And after all, you don't believe in your theory now. So what would you run away with? And what good would running away do you? Being on the run is an unpleasant, arduous business, and what you need above all else is to live and to be in a clearly defined situation with its own clearly defined air. And I mean, what kind of air would you find on the run? You run away and come back again of your own accord. You can't get along without us. And if I lock you up in a cell, you'll stay there for a month or 2 or 3, and then suddenly remember this. You'll turn yourself in such a way that even you will be surprised. You won't know that you're going to do it until you do. I'm even certain that you'll decide to accept suffering. You don't believe what I'm saying now, but you'll think it over to yourself. Because suffering, Rodion Romanovich, is a great thing. Don't go looking at how fat I've got. There's no need. And yet I know, don't laugh, that suffering has a purpose. Mokolka's right. No, you won't run away, Rodion Romanovich. Raskolnikov got up from where he had been sitting and took his cap. Porfiry Petrovich also caught up. Going out for a walk? It should be a fine evening as long as there isn't a thunderstorm. Though actually, it might be better if we were to have one. It might clear the air. He also took up his cap. Look here, Porfiry Petrovich, Raskolnikov said with a grim persistence. Please don't get into your head that I've made any kind of confession to you today. You're a strange man, and I've listened to you out of sheer curiosity. I made no kind of confession to you at all. Bear that in mind. Oh, I know. I'll bear it in mind. But I mean, look at you. You're positively trembling. Have no fear, my good chap. We shall do things your way. Go out and take a bit of a walk. Only don't go too far, that's all. Oh, and just to be on the safe side, I have one little favor to ask you, he added, lowering his voice. It's a rather tricky one, this, but important. If it should possibly transpire, I personally don't believe that it will and consider you quite incapable of doing such a thing. If it should transpire, oh, just by some chance, that you should, during the course of the next 48 hours, conceive a desire to bring this business to an end in some different imaginative way, by, for example, taking your own life, an absurd supposition, and you really must forgive me for mentioning it, then please leave a short but detailed note, you know, just a couple of lines, 2 lines will do, and don't forget to mention the building block. That would be the decent thing to do. Don't forget to mention the building block. That would be a decent thing to do, sir. Well, sir, goodbye. I wish you good thoughts and happy undertakings. Porfiry went out, looking somehow hunched, and as if he were trying to avoid looking at Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov went over to the window and waited with irritable impatience for the moment when, according to his estimate, Porfiry would emerge onto the street and proceed on his way. Then he, too, went quickly out of the room. That's the end of Part 6, Chapter 2.